First, I just want to welcome everybody and thank you for coming today on this Friday before the long weekend for our first ever virtual Krembil coffee break session. And really excited to have you. And these are just, meant to be short, exciting sessions to teach you a little bit about what we know. And wanted to let you know that actually you're already taking the first step to becoming an effective science communicator just by being here today. So just by taking that step and being open to the opportunity. At the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a quote that you probably hear a lot around our office because we love it. Science achieves little if it stays in the lab. And that's a quote that really resonates with us because our job in public affairs is to be able to promote the research that you're doing and the work that you're doing. And so we have to keep this in mind because it's one thing to share it with your colleagues in your labs, and it's another to spread it far and wide. So the work that you do in research and clinical is, of course, has huge impact. But what I want to be able to do today is teach you how to amplify that impact just by telling people about it in a way that interests, inspires, and engages them. So let's get started. So on the agenda today. So again, this is just really meant to be an informal, short, about 15, 20-minute presentation. And really just more of an overview to kind of delve us into the world of science communication. And then what's happening in the weeks to come is that we're sort of trying to delve a little bit deeper into different areas, and we'll be looking for your feedback on that. But today is really for the parents out there that are struggling with homeschooling in addition to working right now. It's kind of like a show what you know. So today I'm showing what I know. And what I know is storytelling and communication. So I want to bring you into that world. And I also want to remind you that today is really a trial run. We have not done this before with the technology and also just, sharing this with you. I got to say, I'm a little rusty. I haven't done this for a while, so be patient. And please, if there's any technical hiccups, just bear with us and we'll get to them. So today we want to talk about what is science communication? Why is it important? How can it benefit you in your work? And really, where should you start? Because I think a lot of times people get overwhelmed at the thought of changing things or doing things maybe a little bit differently. Well, to me, a science communicator is simply somebody that can take complex science and explain it in a simple yet compelling and engaging way to a bunch of different audiences. That's really all a science communicator is. Okay, so we're going to start with what is science communication? We hear the term a lot, but what does it really mean? So I saw this recent report by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine in the US, and these are the 5 goals that they have for science communication. Number 1, share recent findings and excitement for science. 2, increase public appreciation of science. Number 3, boost knowledge and understanding of science. 4, influence people's opinions, policy preferences, and behavior. And number 5 is ensure a diversity of perspectives, which I'm sure resonates with all of us. All right, so you see on your screen a cartoon, and I'm just going to give you a few seconds to read this over, and then we can chat about it. Okay, I can see a few of you smiling, so I think you've probably gotten to the punchline. This is a cartoon by a cartoonist called the Upturned Microscope. His name is Nick Papagiorgio, and he actually is a former cell biologist turned science communicator or cartoonist. And this cartoon really resonates with me, and I'm curious to know if it resonates with you. So obviously the joke is that when you give a scientific explanation and someone asks you to simplify it and you change one word, that does not simplify it. And, oftentimes this is my life. And oftentimes it takes several variations and communications to go back and forth with people in the scientific world to be able to gather that simple or more simple explanation to be able to share it with a lay audience. So simplifying your science is not the same as dumbing it down. In fact, I would argue that simplifying your science is actually harder than trying to explain it to a scientific audience of your peers. Translating a science in a way that really matters to people and really appeals to people can have such a huge impact, as we'll talk more about later on. But really the biggest impact is just being able to share it outside of your circle and being able to be excited. You're so excited about what you're working on. Other people should feel the same way, but they need to know about it and they need to understand how it's going to impact them. So there are a lot of big name proponents of science communication. Number one, Katie Couric is actually doing a lot of work in this area. Mayim Bialik from the Big Bang Theory is a really big proponent of science communication and getting science out there. But probably the most well-known is Alan Alda. Some of us will remember a show that he used to be on called MASH that was super popular, and we still watch in this house. He's been in lots of TV shows, movies along the years, but about 15 years ago, he started hosting a show on PBS called Scientific American Frontiers. Oh my gosh, sorry. And he did that for a few years. And then he actually went and founded the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science at Stony Brook University in New York. And basically what he proposes is that communication isn't something that you add on to science. It's the essence of science. So what he does is he's got a team of people who are scientists themselves or former journalists, people like me. And he trains them to train scientists and doctors and people in the medical field to be able to speak more clearly and more simply to different types of audiences. In some cases, it's talking to patients, and others, it's talking to donors. So that's what he is all about. And basically what he does is he and his team give workshops all over the world, right now virtually, but oftentimes they'll go into hospitals and institutions and they'll teach people all about communicating science more clearly. He also has a really great podcast that I love called Clear and Vivid, where he interviews different people about communication and how communication has impacted their life. So I really highly recommend that you check that out. Okay, so a few times during this presentation, you're going to come across things called pro tips. And basically what these are just, I call them like an extra scoop of ice cream, an extra bit of value-added information. So the first pro tip for you today is talking about Alan Alda and his method is he really relies on improv or improvisation. So impromptu or spontaneous storytelling. And that's how he actually teaches a lot of people to make things more clearly and to engage them with science. He's found that this technique is really helpful, especially in helping scientists to better communicate. And really the most important lessons that you can take away from improv is engaging your audience and keeping things simple. So it sounds probably like something you would never want to try, getting up on a stage and trying improv for the first time. But actually, this is a skill that can help you in your work. Okay, so we're going to talk about a few of the benefits of science communication. Number one, engage the public. This is huge. And this is something that we can really relate to right now in the midst of COVID-19. We are actually right in the middle of sort of a live action rollout of, one of the most important science communication campaigns that we'll ever see. Social distancing. How do you get an entire population to understand a concept that's, really based in science and change their behavior in such a short amount of time? So this is a really interesting way to look at it, but this is science communication. Look at the messaging that's coming from public health. Look at what they're saying, the words that they're using in some of the press conferences. Also look at some of what they're putting out on social media in terms of the visuals and the words that they're using to be able to appeal to such a wide swath of the community. So that's one really important reason why we need to engage the public. We also want to engage the public because they're voters. And these are people that need to understand the importance of scientific research and really fight for funding for scientific research in order to move things forward. So we need the public to understand what you're doing and why you're doing it in order to insist that politicians fund the research that you're working on. And lastly, just on a personal note, I just want to tell you that, for most of my life, I thought science was really boring. I have to be honest. I was a television journalist, and whenever I was assigned anything remotely science related, I would go, oh, really? And then I went to work for this show called Daily Planet, a science show on Discovery Canada. And it actually opened up my entire world. And I couldn't believe how amazing science was. And I just felt robbed, really. And I thought to myself, if I knew analyzing whale snot or tracking lava patterns or building exoskeletons was a job way back then, it honestly would have changed my career path and probably changed my life. Yet here I am full circle with you today talking about science communication. So the moral of the story being, you never know who you're going to inspire at any age in any situation. So it's really important just to remember to keep it exciting and never think that that what you're doing or what you're teaching people is remotely not interesting for them. You just have to present it in a way that really resonates with them. Number 2 is generate media coverage. This is something that we're always looking for, obviously. And, the truth is media is always looking for a great story to tell. And we're in a time now where the media is looking for stories, yet we have fewer and fewer media available. There just aren't as many people, and there certainly aren't as many health reporters and science reporters who understand fully what we're working on. I mean, oftentimes when we get media coming to cover a story, they're general assignment reporters. And so they need, tomorrow they're doing a story on anything related to anything. So we need to be really clear in our messaging if we want to generate media coverage and if we want them coming back. The other part of that too is that media is always looking for what in TV parlance we call good talkers, which is terrible grammar, but it's science communicators, people that can take complex science and break it down in a lay, interesting, compelling way are like gold for TV. And that's why you often see the same people on over and over again and quoted in articles and also being interviewed on CTV and CBC, because they can count on these people to take these complex scientific messages and break them down for their audiences. Okay, this one will really resonate. Interest potential donors. The trend is, has always been that donors are who we look to for funding for research. The funding for research is down. Governments are giving less and less money for research. And so the trend is that actually we'll be relying more and more on donors as we go along. And we have to remember that donors are often not scientists. Usually they're grateful patients or family of grateful patients. And they're here because they're already passionate about the work that you do. But in order to really push it to the next level, they have to understand why it's unique and how they can help you. So the truth is, you never know who you're going to come across in your travels, and you never know whether there's a potential donor out there that might be interested in funding your work. So you have to be able to talk to people in this more simplified way so that you don't miss an opportunity. Building trust and credibility. So this is something that you do anyway in your daily life. I mean, this is something you strive for in your career with your colleagues and in your circles. But building trust and credibility outside of that in the public is super important, especially in this era. To loop back to COVID-19 for a moment, we're hearing a lot about misinformation, and we're certainly seeing a lot about misinformation, especially on social media. So we need people like you who have that knowledge and have that experience. And all you need to learn is how to communicate it to different audiences. But people are craving it. They don't know who to believe or what to believe. So it's great to think about being that thought leader that goes out there and has that knowledge and credibility. And the last one is foster collaboration. And really, this is about your peers. So you may think that, in a pre-COVID world, we're all going to conferences and you're hearing about the latest research. Well, the truth is that you can make those connections as well on social media. Twitter is excellent for that. And so Twitter really, the beauty of it is that it allows you to really build a community and expand your community. You can meet new potential collaborators and colleagues. You can find out about new papers coming out. You won't find out everything, but you'll see a blurb that will pique your interest in a post with a link back to the paper. And it's really interesting how far and wide that's moving, but it's happening. People are meeting more in the social media sphere than they ever have before. Okay, so many of you joining today are scientists or doctors, or you work in the healthcare field, so you like data. So I wanted to give you some data. This is some data for you to consider when it comes to the disconnect between science and the community, because that is a real problem. This is a study that 3M has done, I believe, for the past 3 years. It's called the State of Science Index, and they basically go to many different countries. So these are the numbers pulled from the Canadian report, and this is from last year. 32% of Canadians say that they're skeptical about science. 44% see scientists as elitist, and 30% only believe science that aligns with their personal beliefs. So this is really interesting, I think, for you to keep in mind when you're dealing with people, is that sometimes they're starting with this sort of a bias simply because they don't understand what you're talking about. On the flip side, 86% say that they feel more optimistic when they think about the role of science in the next 20 years. I think the most interesting statistic here, though, is the last one, which is that 39% say they would have more interest in science if it was explained in a way that related to their lives. So I think that's a pretty big number, 40%. Again, to keep in mind when you're on your journey to becoming a science communicator, sometimes it's that easy, just interesting people in what you have to say. So we're going to move into some of the tips. And again, this is meant to be an overview. And if you have any questions, please flip them into the chat and we can certainly get to them at the end, or you can save them until the end. The number one tip, and if you have met me in person, you will already know this because this is sort of my mantra that I'm always talking about. Tell a story. I maintain that everybody wants to hear a great story, even scientists, even your peers and colleagues, even people on the boards of when you're proposing your grants. So I think telling a story is probably the most important tip, whether it's a TV interview, a print article, a grant submission, even a talk. Everybody wants to hear a great story, especially if you use analogies to make your point and you really draw a picture for them. So what's in a great story? There's lots of different formulas that you can go to, but really a great story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginning is always a hook. It's something that really interests your audience. So you have to think, whether it's a personal story, whether it's an analogy, whether it's a really incredible statistic that will grab their attention, you always want to hook them in the beginning. And then the middle of the story has to be about the meat of the story. So what is it that you're working on? What makes it unique? What sets you apart? What are you after? What are you relentlessly trying to do in your research? And then the end of the story, in the TV world, we always call it the payoff, and it's usually some sort of an explosion or something very silly. In our world, I think the payoff is what could this mean for patients, for potential patients, for people in the community? If your research is successful, what could this lead to a new therapeutic? Could this lead to more science that could take us in the direction of a potential cure? So you have to think of it in that context, but storytelling is really important. You have to hook your audience at the beginning and you have to make an emotional connection with them, which is something you don't often hear in the scientific world, but it's important when you're trying to connect with people and let them know what you're working on. The truth is, you may be the story. Your journey to becoming a scientist or a doctor or anyone working in the healthcare field, maybe your journey because of your parents suffering from the disease area that you work in. You could be the story. And, maybe you're a concussion researcher or any type of researcher, and maybe you use the story of a patient, with consent, of course, to be able to tell your story through basically painting the picture of what's happened to them and how their life has changed and how your research is going to help. So here on the screen, sorry, I should have mentioned this. This is one of the stories from last year's Krembil magazine that was arthritis focused. And it's a story about a woman named Susan Rivers, who essentially has been having pain her whole life, but was diagnosed with arthritis at age 10. So you can go back and read this also on our website, but essentially I'm just trying to give you a sense of what a hook might feel like in the beginning of a story that makes you want to read on. Number 2, think visually. This is really just about being creative. So you see on the top line there, these are 3 photos that we use quite often at Krembil for different things, whether it's social media or event publications that we put together. Each of these pictures to me tells a story. So you have to think about when you take a photo for social media or for a photo that you want, to use for a conference brochure, anything like that. You should be thinking about, where are you taking this photo? What are you trying to say with this photo? You're sitting beside a microscope. You're a researcher. Are they candid? Are they portrait? A picture really does tell a story, and it's such an easy way for people to understand a little bit more about what you do before you even say anything. In the middle photo, you'll see a couple of students from Valerie Wallace's lab looking at some microscopy images. Twain and I have, used microscopy images, just knitted them together with some music and put them on social media, and people love them. So sometimes it's just about being creative with what you have visually, which is something that he's really, really good at. On the bottom, you'll see just a couple of graphics that we've put out on social media. I just want to give you a sense of sometimes how simple an idea could be if you want to get on social media and share your work. These are just, quick statistics with the Krembil logo on it with a really interesting visual. And sometimes we'll just put something like this out for an awareness day or an awareness week, and we get people liking and sharing them often. So it's kind of an experiment to see what really resonates with people, and also what you enjoy doing and how you enjoy sharing your science, which is part of this journey. Tip number 3 is understand your audience. And this is something you all mainly excel at. Really, you're used to talking to different types of audiences, but you have to really hone your message. The general public is really interested in how your research is going to affect them today and in the future. A donor may be more interested in what do you need to push your research program forward? How can they help you? Your colleagues probably want to know, about opportunities for collaboration. The media want clear, succinct sound bites. They want something that they can use on the National tonight in their minute-and-a-half long story, or use in a print article. And so the big trick when you're dealing with the media audience is that oftentimes people will ramble, and then at the end they'll say, so in a nutshell, da-da-da-da-da-da, and that's 99% what is used on the news. Kind of another little pro tip. Tip number 4 is craft a 30-second elevator pitch. And this is a photo that we have from a video that we put together for an event a couple of years ago at Krembil called the Pitch Perfect Competition. And we brought together some of our students to give 3-minute pitches based on their work. And Dr. Kevin Smith very nicely came and made this video for us that we were able to put together and that we can send you a link to after the fact. Well, the truth is, what if you suddenly find yourself at a dinner party with a donor? What if you walk into an elevator and Kevin Smith is standing there? You can't waste that opportunity. So you need to have an elevator pitch ready. You have to be ready. So what is an elevator pitch? It's basically ideally a 30 to 60 second pitch, more on the 30 side. You want to quickly introduce yourself, tell them who are you and what do you do? And then you want to quickly go into what you're working on and why it's unique, what sets you apart. And you always, in an elevator pitch, want to leave them with a call to action. It could be something as simple as saying, hey, can I follow up with you next week and tell you more? Maybe, we can set up a meeting. Perhaps it's a business card exchange and you say, I'd love for you to check out my website or my Twitter account and see some of the things that I've been posting lately. So you never want to leave an elevator pitch open. You always want to close it somehow with some sort of a follow-up. And the last tip is join social media. Again, if you and I have had any personal interaction, I've probably tried to convince you to get on social media. I know you don't have time. I know you don't know what to post. I know you don't have time, but you should really consider it. And the truth is that social media feels very overwhelming if you're not used to it, if you've never done it before, but especially with Twitter, which is really still the preeminent way that a lot of scientists are using social media. You can do it in a phased approach. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. You don't have to suddenly think of things to post. You can develop a profile. You can spend some time just looking and seeing which of your colleagues are online. And, and then you can start liking other people's posts. Then maybe you'll want to share other people's posts. And what happens with Twitter oftentimes is it's very organic. So you'll just be moved. You'll want to comment on that person's post. And so you will. You'll want to share that person's post because you're proud of, and you want to share their achievement. So it really doesn't have to be overwhelming. It doesn't have to be something that you have to start today. You can just play a little bit before you actually go out there. The other part about it too is we talked about the misinformation. A 2015 survey that I came across in Nature, they actually polled U.S. scientists and found that 47% of U.S. scientists say that they are using social media to follow new discoveries and also discuss science with their peers. Another survey, a Hootsuite digital survey, they basically talked about 1/3 of social media users getting their science news from Twitter. So a little bit more data for you to consider when you think about the impact of social media and the impact that you can personally have on social media. Okay, the next pro tip, you too can be a science influencer. A science influencer is basically a science communicator with a big social media following. That's it. So once you begin your science communication journey, this could potentially be the end game. On screen, you'll see a couple of examples of scientists, people that work in the science field, who have steadily built up their followers, and they're all worth checking out online. Also because they're just really interesting people, and also because I think if you are interested in getting involved in social media, you should go and see what they're posting. Sometimes it's a photo with a caption. Sometimes it's a link to their paper. Oftentimes they're commenting on things happening in the news and science stories in the news. So if you're really interested in this and you're not sure where to get started, go check out people like David Eagleman, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Samantha Yamin, who's based here in Toronto, and Jennifer Gardy, and just see what they're posting because it really is interesting. Okay. Many of you know about Science in the Six. This was an event that we held at Krembil last October, and we're super proud of it because it was a bit of an experiment, and it just worked so well. So the idea was that we wanted to celebrate UHN research, not specifically Krembil. We wanted to make it a UHN-wide event. And so each of the scientists in that photo is from a different institute. And they were experienced in presenting their work, but they were not experienced in presenting it to a lay audience in a compelling, engaging way. And it was an experiment for us because we worked with them one-on-one. And essentially, they came up with these 3-minute TED Talk style presentations, and we made it into an event, into an evening. And it worked out so well. And the lay audience that was there, media, donors, the public, were so fascinated. And we came away with so much great feedback from people saying, I didn't know that. I had no idea people were working on that in our own city. So right now, I'm going to turn it over to Carly very quickly because we want to show you the quick promo video that we put together for the event just to interest you. Carly, can't hear it.
I was muted. Apologies. Round 2.
Science isn't just microscopes and neurons and bacteria. It's a way of asking questions.
We are training the system to find a new path between the muscle and the brain.
Everyone has some connection to cancer. We need to find a way that we can prolong their life and give them hope.
Studying regeneration or using cells to fix broken hearts, that is something very new.
The brain is vast, the brain is complex. You want to kind of crack that code.
So what if that was a pandemic and the virus spreads really fast? We are predicting the future.
I was always interested in robotics. I love using technology to improve someone's experience.
Science is curiosity, and science is wanting to know more about the world. It's fun.
Whoops. Sorry. Sorry about that. So that was just a little teaser. I've probably watched it 100 times. I love it. It reminds me of a Daily Planet segment, really. It's not something you would ever see, on UHN, and you would never think that way about UHN research until you see it and you hear about it. So all of this is available on our YouTube page, and we'll be sending out a list of resources as well, so you can watch the full event if you missed it. You can also watch little bio video vignettes of each of the scientists and what they're working on. Okay, so to recap, effective science communication skills can help you make science fun and engaging, influence policy through public outreach, generate media interest and coverage, compel new donors to fund your research, and most importantly, inspire young minds. So what are you waiting for? Okay, lastly, again, I wanted to introduce myself, Heather and Twain. We are your public affairs department at Krembil. We are here for you. We cannot build you a website or a Twitter profile, but we can certainly help you with it. We can help advise you on the best way to go about it. We are here to promote your research. So when you have a new paper coming out, please tell us about it. And even if you can take that extra step and write a paragraph in a simple language that we can use for potential press release. We'll always follow up with wanting more information, but it's really important that we understand it so that we can then share it with the wider community. And that's what we're here to do, promote your research and find new and exciting ways of doing that. So before we leave you and before we go to questions, we do have a challenge for you. The challenge, if you are up for it and if you'd like to do it, is to create your own 30-second elevator pitch and then connect with me, and I'll be happy to take you through it and to work with you on it and to hone it so that the next time you're in an elevator with Kevin Smith, you're ready for it. So we're going to be sending out a survey probably early next week, just to remind you about next week's session, to get your feedback on today's session, what you liked, what you didn't, what you'd like to see more of, or what you'd like us to delve further into. We will also be sending out a tip sheet with resources that I've talked about today, a tip sheet with the tips, but also some links to some helpful resources that will help. And finally, one of you lucky viewers is going to be able to, at some point soon, hopefully, win a Krembil mug. So we're giving away prizes too, as if just joining us today wasn't enough. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see our email addresses. Many of you already know how to reach us, but just in case, we would be happy to chat with you anytime. Okay. So we've got questions. And I'll be happy to answer them, but they've disappeared off my screen. Do you see them, Carly?
Okay. Yes, I do. So the first question is whether or not the slides will be made available after this session.
Yes, I can certainly make the slides available.
The second question, which has somewhat been answered already, but it's where can I get pictures to use in presentations? I always have difficulty in finding something high quality that is not copyright protected. So Twain has provided an answer, but I'm not sure if you want to unmute yourself, Twain, and maybe speak a little verbally to that.
Yeah, so those are just a few websites that are free stock images, so they aren't copyrighted. You can definitely look them up on Google. They're pretty common, and you can use those photos for presentations to help tell your story and that sort of stuff. And they're free, which is great, and you don't have to worry about copyright.
So some of those websites, in case anyone else is having difficulty reading, it's Pexels, Stock Snap, Landing Stock, Nappy, and Photo Creator. I've also used Unsplash before. Generally, you can do a nice Google search and you can come up with some different stock websites in the beginning.
Okay.
So one more. It's just a comment. Very often the message is too promotional and simply fake. I hope you'll discuss how to be balanced.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing to talk about, actually. Really, it depends on who you're talking to. The message should never be fake. I mean, I'm coming from the journalism world, and I see stories everywhere at Krembil. Every time I'm talking to anyone, I can see an authentic, genuine story to be able to pitch to media. So I'd be curious to talk to you more about that. I don't know if you want to chat about it, but when you say fake, is it, could it be pertaining to messaging of, we're going for a cure, that sort of thing sometimes is what comes back, and people say, well, I'm not comfortable with that language. And I completely understand that. I think that there's lots of ways it's all about language. It's all about finding the right words to talk about the fact that you're pushing the research forward, but it may be years before we potentially see a breakthrough. I think that oftentimes you can be really sensitive to the idea of promotion when it comes to science, but there really has to be a balance out there, because you have to think about how difficult it is. It's difficult anyway to get medical stories covered by media. And I say this, after many years of working in media, and especially at Daily Planet, to be able to do a medical research story almost never happen, because there are no visuals. There, how in the world can a story sustain 4 or 5 minutes on air? So we have to be creative in how we promote medical research. And I agree 100%. We certainly can't go overboard or say something that isn't authentic. But there's always a balance in promotion. And I think that it really has to do with the language. And I think that's where public affairs can really come in handy, a conversation with us about how to do that. I hope that answered your question. Happy to talk more about it.
Yeah, I was just going to add, do you think that this could also be where that storytelling really comes in, and making sure that you have a genuine and authentic story that really connects with you, that would assist in making it, more approachable and not seem fake with the wording that was used there?
I think that, we have a session coming up in a few weeks about media training, and that's where I was going to go into more of these specifics. But what often happens, let's talk about it. What often happens is you'll come out with a new paper that the media is interested in. A reporter will come, and usually the scientist or doctor and I will talk a little bit first, and we'll run through the potential questions. But what happens when a television reporter comes and sits in your office is you think, now's my chance. And then you sit and you tell them everything that you've worked on for the last 25 years. And they go away and they put together a television story that you are not happy with. And, and you think, oh, they got it wrong. But the truth is, it's not always their fault. We have to, on our end, we have to think about what is the message that we want to get across today about whatever it is that we're being interviewed about. It may not be relevant to bring up the last 5 studies that you've worked on, even though they are connected to the paper that came out today. It's just, we really have to be more succinct. And really, this is where science communication comes in. It's thinking about that messaging, thinking about how to hone that message, and what do you want that journalist to come away with. And so I think it's on us sometimes to really think about the messaging and the wording that we want to give. And you also have to know that if a CBC reporter is coming to do a story on your latest paper, they're going to ask you these 3 questions. What did you find? Why does it matter? And how will it help patients? That's it. So if you can hone your message to those 3 things and not worry about all the extra added information, which is so relevant, but will never be used in this context, I think everybody will overall be happier.
Excellent. So we have two sort of comments that are somewhat in line with one another, and it's about oversimplifying. And so there's a comment from Michael that says, in fact, we sometimes need to oversimplifies, and it could actually sound less credible for us scientists. There's another comment about this as well. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yes, this is a very legitimate issue. Since I've joined this world about 1.5 years ago, this comes up all the time. You have worked your entire life to get you to this point. You have been in the research world, and when we talk about trust and credibility, that's what you've been building up in your circles and with your colleagues. Absolutely, there has to be a balance between that, because media, if it's not science media, and frankly, even if it is science media, especially if it's science media, they are always going to want that lay explanation. They're always going to want an analogy. They're always going to want you to simplify what it is that you're talking about, because otherwise people are just not going to understand. I maintain that there's always a way to do it. And it's part of kind of the training that we're starting to talk about today. You can't wake up one day and be a science communicator. You have to get your head around it. You have to figure out why it's important and how you can do it. So I will just say that I know that a lot of people in this world are very worried about oversimplifying it, and then going out into the world and doing a CBC or CTV interview and coming across in a certain way. And that's totally valid and legitimate. I think you really have to get to that point where you're comfortable with the message and the wording that you're going to say. And it takes practice, and it takes rehearsing, and it takes public affairs help to be able to train you to get to that point that you're comfortable with everything that you've said, so that no matter what they use, you're going to be happy with it. And the other part of it is not oversharing, not giving them too much information. And that way you really sort of control it down. So I just want to tell you a quick story that really happened, just to give you some context. When I was working for Daily Planet, I was at University of Berkeley doing a couple of stories. One of the stories that we were working on was a story about clams. Now, there's a very scientific name for this species of clam, but they were called disco clams because they flashed. And that's why I was there, because we had video of flashing clams. Let's be honest. Now, the beauty of Daily Planet is that we had 4 or 5 minute stories to do. So the science always got in there. But, if those clams hadn't flashed and we didn't have video of it, it's very likely we wouldn't have been doing that story. So in the middle of doing this interview with this, young, wonderful marine biologist who works with these clams, she went to speak to her advisor, and she comes back in Heather, can I talk to you for a second? And she says, listen, I'm really sorry, but my advisor says that you can't say disco clams. You have to call them by their scientific name, which was like 100 letters long. And we had this really funny conversation. And she said, I know, I'm so sorry. I said, well, I'm so sorry because if I can't call them disco clams, and I got to warn you, potentially use 70s disco music, I'm not going to be able to do this story. Like, we're not here to do a story about random clams. We're here to do a story about these amazing flashing clams. All this to say, we ended up doing the story about disco clams. I called them disco clams. I used disco music, and the science got in there, and everybody was happy. But because they didn't know me, they weren't sure how this story was going to turn out. It takes a little bit of trust to be able to be kind of creative like that. And, and that story, it was shared and viewed, and the viewers absolutely loved it. And they reran it, 100 times because it was just the way that it was presented was palatable for people. And they never would have known about this species of clam or the fact that they have 40 eyes or the fact that, bioluminescence and how that can connect to some other things that are being studied. So there's so many creative ways of taking what you're working on and not oversimplifying it. It's just a matter of getting comfortable with it.
That's great, Heather. I think there's several of us that are going
40 eyes.
Yeah, we're going to all go off and Google disco clams after this.
I'll put the link actually in the tip sheet. I'll put the link in there.
Yeah. So I've got one last thing here, and I think it goes back to something seeming overly promotional or fake. The example used is actually that if we're promoting work with respect to treatment that's been tried in an animal model, it's preclinical, it's often oversold as a cure for humans tomorrow. So I think it's more about, how sometimes media could potentially spin that, or that message could be sort of exaggerated.
Right. And this is, as I mentioned before, this is a completely valid concern that, I think you have to come at it. Again, I'm talking from my years of media experience. You have to come at it knowing that if you're not willing to talk about the potential of what your research could mean, even 5, 10, 20 years down the line, they're not going to do the story. And really, why should they? If someone like me is watching CBC at night, think about it. Why should I really be interested in a story about medical research that does not pertain to me at all? The fact is that all of your research has impact for everybody who might potentially watch a story about it. So you have to get your head around how you can be comfortable with the promotion of your work while not overselling it. This is a balance. So if that's the way that you feel about how something's been portrayed, what I would say is next time you're in that situation, come and talk to me and work with me. And we can, oftentimes what I'll do with people before media interviews is we do mock interviews. And maybe that's something that we can do as one of these sessions, or maybe as part of the media training session, so that you can know what's coming your way. But going into an interview or going into a situation where you're feeling like you're promoting your work in a way that you're not comfortable with, that you should never do that. And if, you have to get to a point where you're comfortable with how it's being portrayed. But you have to really remember, as I said before, that the media is always going to want to know those 3 things. So if you can come up with an explanation before you walk into that room and sit down, probably your stress level is going to be a lot less, and they're going to walk away with a much better story. But we can't keep the silos going. And I say this again as someone who comes from a very lay background of journalism. There's a definite silo between science and the public and science and the media. And I really feel like we're at a point where we have to break the silos. People have to know what you're working on to be able to support it financially. And also, as we talked about before, with policy. Like, if you want government to support funding for scientific research, then you have to go talk to your neighbors and explain what you're working on. You have to put yourself out there as a thought leader and potentially on social media to let people know what you're working on and why it's important, especially now looking at what's going on with COVID. And people need to understand the connection between scientific research and dealing with, this pandemic and others to come. So it's a real opportunity, and it's a real storytelling opportunity. And I would say, again, if you're not comfortable, this is a job for public affairs to come and talk to you and really practice and get it to a point where you're comfortable with what you're going to be talking about.
Okay, excellent, Heather. I think we're at 11:15. So there's no more questions or comments to address. So I think that's it for today. If you want to just close off.
Sure. So I just want to close by thanking everybody for coming today. I hope you enjoyed the session and got something out of it. We really, really welcome your feedback. So again, look out for a survey coming your way to let us know what you liked, what you didn't, and what you'd like to see more of. And again, just want to reiterate that Public Affairs is here to support you. We are excited about your work, and we want to know what you're working on and help you get the word out. So get in contact with us, use us, and make us part of your world. And that's it. I hope everybody has a safe and happy long weekend and restful long weekend. Thank you.